Community was something that I didn't understand my entire life. My family is broken, not together, and for my entire life up until college, I had the me against the world and the world against me mentality. I thought every emotion, every hardship, every life issue had to be dealt with personally, and that no one helps. That's a non-existent thought. And as I grew up and as I matured, I realized that the world's actually a dark and really scary place, and I'm overwhelmed by that. And so I ran towards alcohol and relationships and control and violence, especially as my family grew further and further apart. And this was the story that I was entering into for my entire life. Me against the world, and use substances to make you feel better, and it didn't work. In my senior year of high school, I heard about this organization called Young Life. I didn't know what it was, and I went because a cute girl invited me. I remember the very first time I walked in, we were playing these weird games, and at the very end of it, they separated the guys and the girls, and I'm the new guy, and I'm upset because she's going over there, and I'm staying over here with the guys, and we sat in a circle, and I remember thinking, this is so weird. Who sits in a circle just to do something? Like kumbaya, essentially. And they pulled a Bible out, and I remember so specifically being so angry that I was seeing this Bible. I'd never really seen one before. And in my head, I was believing and thinking, this thing has started wars, this thing is evil, and I want nothing to do with this. So I tuned out everything that happened that night. And the night ended, we drove home, and I was, I vowed that I would never, ever, ever, ever go to a Young Life event again. Graduate high school, and then my freshman year in college, I'm trying to run track, and I'm working, and school's tough, I don't have any friends. And sure enough, I meet these Young Life people on campus, and I start hanging out with them. And shortly after hanging out with them, they invited me to a spring break trip, and I'm in college, and I'm like, yeah, college, you're supposed to do something crazy for spring break. I was like, Cabo. No one invited me to Cabo. And so I went to this Young Life work week, and I knew everyone going was Christian. I super was not Christian, and so I bought a Bible because I was going to pretend to be one so they didn't ask me weird questions. And when I showed up to this work week, for the first time in my life, I had strangers intentionally ask me questions and intentionally pursue me, and it was different than anything that I'd ever experienced. And so that stirred some curiosity for me, and shortly after that, a friend of mine sat down with me and he said, Taylor, I need to share with you what we believe. I was like, whatever. And he said, Taylor, I need to tell you the gospel. And so he told me that God created everything. He created the mountains and the trees and the air. And he created me and my friend, and he created us perfectly. And in our brokenness and in our rebellion and in us trying to be God, Adam and Eve in the garden decided we want to rule. We want to be the kings of our own lives. They rebelled against God, and I'm super visual in the way that I think about it is God and humanity are in a perfect sphere. But in the moment that they rebel against God, that sphere is broken, and God's over here, and humanity's over here, and what's over here is brokenness. And translate that into sin. You see it everywhere you go. Check the news, walk down the street, look at families, and look at your own personal life. And then I started looking at my own personal life and thinking, okay, my family's not together. I'm drinking way too much. Relationships are the worst. They're great, but they're also the worst. And I'm trying to control everything, but in me trying to control everything, I'm actually getting more and more empty inside and more distraught. And then he said God didn't intend for us to stay in that broken state. So he sent down himself as Jesus, his son, who lives a perfect life on planet Earth for 33 years. And in the last 3 years of his life, he begins his ministry, and he invites people to follow him because he gives life eternal and life with God our Father. And by believing in him, you enter into a relationship with God. And the world hated him for it. The religious leaders at the time hated him for it. So they put him on a cross and they killed him. So Jesus, who's fully God, fully man, dies and rises from the grave 3 days later, proving that he defeats both sin and death, and that by believing in him, repenting and believing, acknowledging that you're broken, you enter back into a relationship, perfect relationship with God your Father. And so this guy's telling me this at the end of my freshman year, and I'm like, bro, you are crazy. You believe that someone actually rose from the grave, and I was mad at him. I didn't want him to share that story with me ever again, but these people were really nice and asked really good questions, and they seemed to love me, and I didn't understand why. So for 2 years I read this Bible, and I wanted to prove that God didn't exist. But the more that I read the Bible, the more curious I got, the more questions I had. And I remember my junior year in college, at this point partying way too much, drinking way too much, relationships way too much. And I'm in New York and I made some poor decisions and did some illegal things, broke the law. And I'm on the plane back to the Pacific Northwest for class. And I had this light bulb moment that maybe, just maybe, if I believe in this fairy tale story, that I enter into this family that this book, the Bible, is talking about, the family of God. So I called up my friend, I was like, bro, we gotta talk. And shortly after that, in about April of 2014, I decided to follow Jesus. I didn't have all the answers, and I wish I could tell you that the heavens split open, or I heard an audible voice, or this bush lit on fire, and then the smoke writ in the sky, I am God. That's crazy. That didn't happen. But what did happen was an overwhelming sense of peace and an overwhelming sense of fullness that the world was trying to fill this void in my heart and my soul, and it never did. But this Jesus character, Jesus himself in the Bible, very much filled that void. And since then, it has been a journey that I cannot explain, but I promise anyone that following Jesus brings a life that is way more fulfilling. And so all these world problems that are around me, yeah, it's still broken, but Jesus very much completes all of that brokenness, and a life with Jesus is absolutely worth following. My name is Garnica, and I am a part of a greater story.